And before this video starts, I'm getting footage for a video live on Twitch right now, so if you want to come stop by, well, you know where to go. Lucio. If any of you are like me, then this guy and a certain piece of saltine tuna are the reason you got into Overwatch. Lucio is by far my most played and favorite support in the entire game, a sentiment shared by many players, but it's never always for the same reason. Some love speeding their team around, others love fucking up a Widowmaker, and then some people just like frogs. He's consistently been a strong pick throughout Overwatch's lifespan, but if you listen to the community, then that doesn't entirely hold true. Lucio is Overwatch's most inconsistently consistent support, so let's talk about it. And before we get into this, I just need to give a brief explanation as to what the video structure actually is. When I say that I'm covering their history, it's just balance history, things like notable changes, reworks, the like. Then I cover the actual character, where we talk about whatever issue they have now, blah blah blah, blah blah blah, you all get it. But, to clarify, that means that during that time, I'm gonna end up covering their meta history throughout Overwatch 1 and 2, because some people may have only just gotten into the game during Overwatch 2. So spoiler viewers, lads, I'm not yapping, but I do appreciate you watching the videos anyway. But for now, I'm gonna go into the history. If you already know it, there's timestamps, skip ahead if you so please. So when it comes to release Lucio, there's only one important piece of information that needs to be known. This fecker had a 30-meter radius on his aura. The first significant change was a good old quality of life one, giving Lucio the ability to start wall ride when moving backwards. But April 2017 was when he got his first set of big changes, and it was actually a mini rework. First, his weapon got a damage increased, a boost to the travel time on the projectiles, and now his boop would actually take verticality into account. Crossfade had the aura reduced down to 10 meters while buffing the healing, though lowering how much it healed Lucio. And wall ride received one of my favorite changes of all time. Move speed was increased by 20% while wall riding, and you also got a speed boost when you jumped off a wall. Wall ride also ended up getting another buff to the move speed a few months later. And after nearly a year, we have just more changes to wall ride, letting it go around corners without popping Lucio off the wall, letting Lucio wall ride back onto the same wall, and of course, Boop got some nice bits to its quality of life as well, letting it be used while reloading and removing the ammo needed. Crossfade got a buff up to 12 meters, and there wasn't much noticeable until about 2019, with Amp getting some number adjustments and wall ride receiving another speed buff. The final Overwatch 1 change that Lucio ever got was around 2019 as well, where he just received a couple shifts to his numbers. And during the Overwatch 2 beta, Lucio spawned in as the exact same being from Overwatch 1, with the only notable change being that his self-healing was getting reduced thanks to the addition of the support passive. And again, we've got nothing notable until 2024, where Boop got a buff to knockback and lockout time alongside the damage. And the final change he's gotten was just a damage shift, lowering the primary fire and increasing the Boop damage. But before I start talking about Lucio, let's talk about support when Overwatch first released. Now in my Mercy and Sim videos respectively, I have already covered this, but it was for different topics, so just for a moment I'm going to cover the exact point that I want to say. Now in my Role Passive video, one of my community members asked me what did I mean by an overhealing issue in the game. So while that isn't entirely the purpose of this video, it's actually useful enough to cover because it goes into Lucio's design. So anyway, Overwatch released 2016, and we had 4 supports: Mercy, Lucio, Zenyatta, and Symmetra. Now, we're not getting into the Sim discussion, we have a video for that, so go there, we're going to ignore her. So let's look at our other 3 healers. We had Mercy, providing high healing per second, single target healing, along with the fact that she had a nice little bundle of utility in her kit. We had Zen, who had much lower healing that was also single target, but in exchange he offered a hefty amount of damage and utility for his team, and of course Transcendence had a massive burst to healing whenever you needed that during an ultimate fight. And finally you had Lucio, who could heal in an AoE, but again had a very low healing per second in that AoE. And of course he had the insane utility that was aura and speed boost. Even if we fast forward a bit going to Ana, this design philosophy still holds true to at least to an extent. She had a high healing per second, but single target heal. If you wanted to heal 2 people at once in early Overwatch, you either had to sacrifice the amount of healing dealt, or use an ultimate or ability that would increase the amount of healing. And this leans into why Lucio is one of the best designed supports in the game to me. He has his strengths in his mobility and his utility, and of course back then he was the only one who had access to AoE healing, but the thing about his AoE healing is that it's actually balanced. Yes, you can heal your entire team at once, but they're not exactly rocketing back to full HP. Sure, there was a time where his AoE heals were an issue, but that was largely in part to Ana and nade boost whenever you were in a quad tank comp, but that eventually got a nerf and he was doing grand. And that quad tank meta showed us something. AoE heals that can bring your entire team back to full health in mere seconds is not good for the game, which... Look, there's already people who've covered these two characters. And again, that's why Lucio is one of the best designed supports in the game to me. His focus isn't on healing, so he can afford to have an AoE heal, along with the fact that he gives some great utility for your team to use. But enough of that talk, let's look at Lucio when Overwatch released. And good lord, this man was strong, if not broken. I mean, a 30-meter radius on Aura, and for reference, this is what 30 meters looks like. It was a little bit too big to be considered reasonable. So needless to say, Lucio was incredibly powerful, but this was early Overwatch, so no one used him to his full potential, or at least as best as they could have. Obviously, back then, he still had his meta moments. I mean, of course he did. I was just talking about quad tank, and in the Ryan video and the Brig one, I go a little more in detail about those, so if you want to check them out, that's where you know where to go. But it was around this time that we were starting to see a shift in Lucio's style. And this can largely be attributed to one man who some of ye may remember, who goes by the name DSP Stanky. Reddit Lucio, as we all know it now, was born from this man and his videos. The style of Lucio that's all in on murder, running around, and just not caring about what your team wants. A bit of an exaggeration, yes, though it was still the case. This new style of Lucio, popularized by Stanky, was where his divide, or as I put it, inconsistency, was born. His player base was split. Some Lucios just wanted to stick with their team, boost them around, and help peel against enemy dive attempts, while others were the enemy dive attempts. Now, in Overwatch 1, this didn't really affect much, aside from the illegal things you'd hear in voice chat for daring to do something different, but come Overwatch 2, and it's a different story entirely, but we're not quite there yet. So 2017, Lucio got his mini rework, which effectively just did one thing. It gave Reddit Lucio a massive buff. The Overwatch devs tend to design characters like Russian ballerinas, I've said this before. They're designed with the goal of having one primary purpose to serve. Different playstyles will always exist. Like I've said previously, I used to play Pharah like a dive character rather than a spam one pre-rework, but the devs don't provide much for these new styles. They rarely make changes that encourage them, but in at least some cases, they also don't make changes to discourage them. But this rework tears that idea apart. A buff to his speed and damage, coupled with a nerf to aura range, even though the aura numbers for heal and speed got a buff, this entire set of changes was absolutely massive for a less team-oriented Lucio style, but they were still equally as large for a team-oriented Lucio. I mean, release wall ride was god awful, and these changes made it genuinely useful, whether you're hunting down a Widow or sending your entire team into the enemy. Though let's be real, they were much more beneficial for your battle Lucios, but it doesn't change the fact that these changes just made Lucio more impactful no matter what way you played him. These changes were one of the first instances of Blizzard encouraging diverging playstyles on a character, which I just find cool as hell. And with that segment on his rework done, let's talk about wall ride. In the current day, it's one of the most fun and skill-expressive abilities in the game. But it took a lot of building to get here. I mean, release wall ride had no speed boost, only lasted for 3 seconds, and would break if there was so much as a speck of dust on the wall that you were on. But buff after buff built it up to actually be a really fun and engaging ability to use. I mean, his mini rework was the biggest example of that. But there was another set of changes that we've already covered that really send him over the edge. In 2018, Lucio got the ability to infinitely wall ride around corners, wall ride onto the same wall. And these sets of changes were pretty controversial back then. They lowered the barrier to entry, skill floor, whatever way you want to put it, on wall ride. They made it easier to use for the general populace, which a lot of the Reddit Lucios, movement-focused Lucios, whatever you want to call them, their style of gameplay, they didn't like how that was being made easier. Now, personally, I don't really mind these changes because getting 2 speed boosts by jumping off of the same wall can be really handy sometimes, but I can absolutely understand the frustration of the Lucios back then, just having an aspect of their character completely changed because people just couldn't learn how to play. Though realistically, just seeing a Lucio wall ride infinitely in the center thing on Oasis City Center is so funny to me that, look, I don't really care. But still, this didn't change the fact that wall ride was an integral part of Lucio's kit. I mean, look at any high-level Lucio, they're spending more time on the walls than on the actual ground. And just to finish off this Overwatch 1 Lucio section, let's just take a brief look at some metas. Because this man has been a core in so many of them, it's insane. Like I said, we had those quad tanks, we had goats, we had double shield, we had the most mentally ill dive comp, rush comp things that you'll ever see in your life. He was damn near omnipresent because speed boost was so consistent for your team. It could be used in nearly any type of setting. And come Overwatch 2, well, this is more so the case than ever. Lucio has been a part of damn near every meta we have had in this game. I mean, Kiriko Lucio has just become the backline of all time, the support core. Good heals, good utility, good survivability, good damage, they've got it all. They are the strongest possible backline duo you could have. However, despite being consistently a strong pick in team environment, his Reddit Lucio, DPS Lucio, whatever the hell you want to call it style, has been on a decline and a half. The main reason being this little thing called the tank passive. Obviously, the most recent version is even worse for Lucio, but even when it was just 30% on release, he was suffering. Sure, a buff came off for the knockback, which made it so that he could actually boop tanks, but in literally one patch, the change was just cancelled out entirely when playing versus them. While the DPS style certainly works well when you're hunting down Widowmakers, it falls completely flat if you want to remove Roadhog more than 2 feet. And all of this builds up to the reason why I call him the most inconsistently consistent support. On the one hand, he's been in so many metas and been one of the best picks in Overwatch 2 since it came out. He's consistently strong, thanks to speed boost, yet at the same time, the Lucio Mafia as they're called, are saying he's in one of the worst states he's ever been in. His ability to kill is the most inconsistent that it's ever been, because, depending on who you're up against, you're either sending people into space or barely moving them at all. He isn't in a bad state overall, so we're clear, though booping tanks does feel like ass, which leads into the DPS Lucio style just being in a terrible state, while a team-orientated Lucio is thriving. I do wish he got some kind of change to help him out with that, like just decreasing how much the tank passive affects him, but I highly doubt that would ever happen, considering it ends up invalidating the reason we have the tank passive to begin with, and don't even get me started on the tank passive, I've got a video on that already. Trying to balance two styles of gameplay that fundamentally differ is, well, a balancing act, and a tough one at that. Though Blizzard have done it for Lucio in the past, so I'd say the right change can make Lucio's diverging playstyles two sides of the same coin, instead of being a 4-pronged knife and a 1-pronged fork. Lucio, like I've already said, is one of my favourite supports in the game, whether I'm playing as, with, or against him. He never feels unfair or frustrating, no matter what is happening in the game that you're in. He is by far one of the best designed supports, maybe even best designed characters in the whole game. Man's got one of the most fun mechanics, was the origin of the term booping, and to top it all off, he's been consistently strong throughout the game's lifespan. Though, in the landscape of Overwatch 2, his consistency is starting to get inconsistent. But that doesn't change the fact that I love him to absolute bits. But tell me yourselves, what do ye think of Lucio? Whether you play for your team, you play to kill enemy widows, or if you're some hybrid of the two, I want to hear it. And of course, for some self-promotion, I've got our Discord, Twitch, Twitter, all that in the description so you know where to go if you want to check out any of those. And finally, if you're still here, go on, drop a like, drop a sub, all that YouTube stuff, and I'll talk to you next time, lads.